Welcome to Skeptico, where we explore controversial science with leading researchers, thinkers, and their critics. I'm your host, Alex Sakaris, and on this episode of Skeptico, we're going to return to Christianity, the Bible, with biblical scholar Dr. Mike Heiser. Now, the topic of religion, and in particular Christianity, has come up several times on the show, and I keep returning to it because I think as we push forward the evidence for an immaterial spiritual reality, and I think that evidence is pretty well established, I think it behooves us to take that extra step and go back and look at the people who've been saying for the longest time that there is this other immaterial spiritual reality. And regardless of what your feelings are about the way that Christian doctrine gets played out in the public forum, I think we have to return to the tradition and see if there's any parts of that that fit. And that's what I sought out to do with Dr. Mike Heiser. So here's that interview along with a couple of thoughts at the end. Today we welcome biblical scholar and author Dr. Michael Heiser to Skeptico. Mike has a PhD from the University of Wisconsin in biblical languages and a master's in ancient history from Penn. He's a frequent guest on a number of radio programs such as Coast to Coast AM. He's also the author of a paranormal thriller, The Facade. Mike, thanks so much for joining me today on Skeptico.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I appreciate it because, and I'm glad to invite you because, as I explained in my email, I'm trying to make some connections here between your work, biblical scholarship, and some of the topics you've covered, because you've really expanded beyond just your run-of-the-mill biblical scholar, if you will, but also between some of that and some of the stuff we've explored relating to science and spirituality. I think there's some overlap, and that's what I'm hoping to get to. So before we get into that, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself and how your history in terms of why you got interested in the field that you're in, particularly in languages, ancient languages, and also how that kind of morphed into pulling you into a lot of these other discussions about the paranormal.
Okay. Well, my field is Hebrew and Semitic languages, as you introduced. I can remember way back in junior high, sitting in an ancient history class, thinking to myself, "This is what I want to do," because I was always interested. I was always interested in anything weird and old, and ancient history was sort of right in there. And I didn't have a particularly religious background orientation. My mom tells me I was baptized when I was an infant, so I'll believe her. She's my mom. But I mean, we didn't really have any sort of church bent, if you want to call it that. When I became a teenager, I started getting interested in what we would sort of loosely term spiritual things now, and it was actually through a neighbor that I sort of was directed. I mean, I would say now providentially, toward my faith, and it didn't conflict in any way with, again, my interest in anything old and weird, because it's like, man, the Bible's full of old and weird stuff. So I just became fascinated with it. And it just sort of, again, helped funnel me and also expand, because there's just so much in there. So by the time I got out of high school, I knew I was going to pursue some sort of academic track, and I wound up taking courses in biblical studies, taking courses in history, and eventually at some point you got to focus on something. And so to me the most attractive was Old Testament and ancient Near East, again, probably subconsciously, because that was the oldest and the weirdest. And I figured, hey, if I go into that, I'm going to get into all sorts of other things like ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia and all that sort of thing. And of course, I did, because that's just standard fare for the field. And it still is just sort of this endless fascination as to what people were saying, and sort of trying to get inside their heads. And as it pertains to biblical studies, as some of your listeners may already know, I'm I'm a big advocate, even to the point of irritation to your standard, Christian audience, that the Bible is something that can only be understood in light of its own context, and its own context is not your church, it's not evangelicalism, it's not Catholicism, it's not the Reformation, it's the culture that produced it. That again, in my belief, that God decided, hey, I want somebody down there to start recording something about me for posterity, and that happened to begin. It certainly didn't end in the second millennium BC, and so that's sort of a little bit of it. The whole paranormal thing, I find, is actually there's some significant overlap here, because people who are into the paranormal really just are asking the same sorts of questions that your basic religions are. Why am I here? How did I get here? Is there anybody else out there? The whole question of, is there a God? Is there a spiritual world that's populated with intelligences, and all this sort of thing? And then that just really dovetails with the whole issue of consciousness. And so all these things to me are sort of concentric circles. They're a natural set of concentric circles that I don't see really any conflict with. But on the religious side, I do run into people that are very religious, either traditional Jewish or conservative Christian, that get a little bit disturbed about the whole paranormal thing, because they're from my perspective, they're looking at the Bible much too narrowly, as though it's some sort of exhaustive grocery list of things that are real. So if I can't find it on a page of the Bible, it must not be real. Well, the Bible never claims to be that. It's by nature very selective. It's a Mediterranean-centered document, and what's in there is pertinent to a goal that that both the divine and the human author had, to having people think about a certain set of things. And so I think in a lot of respects, and consciousness is certainly one of them, we get sort of little cracks in the wall, or the door opens a crack that we can sort of see certain ideas that were present, or that get sort of alluded to in a document like the Bible, although we don't necessarily get a full-blown explanation of things, but we get lots of hints of things. So to me, like I said, I don't really see them as competing spheres of inquiry. I view them more as concentric circles.
Mm-hmm. Well, in reading some of your work, I do understand where both there would be that synergy or that overlap with some of the consciousness work, and I do understand where you would maybe come into conflict with some traditional Christians. I was going to read for you this quote, and it's from a few years ago, and I pulled it off of a lecture you did. I really liked it. I hope it's still representative of your thinking, but we'll see, because I'll read it for you. This is in a presentation you gave a few years ago. Here goes. The Bible's description of the otherworldly conflict raging all around us has been lost to view because of a veil of familiarity we've draped around it. Most Christians have not dumped their belief in miracles or the spiritual world, and yet something inside us as moderns compels us not to believe in an invisible, animate world or universe. We aren't as open to the supernatural as we think we are. Many Christians are supernaturalists who think like skeptics.
Yeah, that's still me.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, I've not come into contact with anything that persuades me to the contrary. So.
What did you mean by that last part? We're not as open to the supernatural, us being Christians. I'm not a Christian, but Christians aren't as open to the spiritual to the supernatural as they think they are, and that they think like skeptics. What did you mean?
Well, it's because it goes back to this whole mentality of, I need a black and white chapter and verse with painfully explicit detail thing in the Bible to describe a certain issue, let's say like ghosts or something like that, in order for me to believe it. And so there's this, again, this notion that unless I can sort of just blindly pull it out of there, and it's just there in wonderful detail, that it's not something that's real, which is just, again, an odd way to approach not only the Bible, but a lot of other things too. And when I talk about being skeptical, it's like every Christian sort of intuitively knows, they ought to objectively know, but they intuitively know at least that there are certain ideas without which they pretty much don't have Christianity. And so they're perfectly willing, to accept things like, a virgin birth or a Trinity or something like that requires, by definition, the sort of supernatural eyes or the interjection of a supernatural hand into the world, because those things get spelled out to a certain extent and they're indispensable. But things that do not meet either of those criteria, that you don't have much detail, and that the individual can't see much essentiality, or even benefit to caring about, those things tend to get dismissed. And if I can be even more critical, there are a lot of people that basically go through life, thinking, unless my pastor or my priest brought it up, it's either not true or it can't be important. And so we just tend to think poorly in those regards. And I think the last thing I would say about the skeptic line too is, someone comes to us with an experience. I've had preachers, pastors, either tell me personally or by email that I was doing this funeral or I was at a funeral and I saw, or somebody else that I just have known all my life and trust saw the deceased person just sort of standing there, for a moment, and then they look back and they wasn't there. Well, you start saying things like that, and right away our propensity is, well, maybe you were overcome by grief. Maybe you need a physical. Maybe you didn't take your meds that day. We tend to think like moderns in that we are very, very hesitant to accept anything that's outside the material reality, that we don't question. We tend to just reject anything that's outside that material reality unless it's the only remaining possibility, and we go through all these other layers of inquiry. And that's not necessarily bad, but it just seems we gravitate there immediately, as opposed to sort of ranking it among 3 or 4 given coherent possibilities up front. And like I said, I've not seen anything to this point that really persuades me to the contrary.
Okay, I'm right there with you, Mike. But now, what do we do with those encounters? What do we do with the deathbed visions, the near-death experiences, the ghostly encounters? How do we approach them, and what possible role would the Bible play in our understanding of that? If, as you describe, maybe Christians take it too literally in saying, hey, if I can't find a particular passage that would direct me how to interpret this experience, then I have to kind of just file it away under this category or that category. So maybe that isn't the right thinking. But what is someone supposed to do? I'm stumbling because I was about to say a Christian supposed to do, but I hate to think in those terms. What is a person supposed to do who wants to try and figure out what's going on with these very unusual but seem to be rather commonplace encounters that we run into?
Well, I tend to think that these sorts of things, that these are not either or sorts of categories. It's either this or that. I think there are a number of things that ought to be given equal weight, is how I would answer it, because I do believe in a supernatural, and I don't really like that term, but basically a non-human world. Since I do believe in that, I'm not a philosophical materialist. I'm willing to upfront consider the possibility that the deathbed experience, or something at a funeral or whatever, that that actually is a point of intersection between our world and then that other reality plane. For me, that is up front one of the considered possibilities, as opposed to being the last resort, or just not even getting on the table at all, because I don't find it in a creed, or my minister never talked about it, or something like that. So I think we ought to be open. I think biblically we are driven. We ought to be driven to be open to that extent, because you do have episodes in both testaments that sort of, again, give you a little glimpse that this was part of the biblical writer's worldview, not just a generic ancient worldview, but the biblical writer's worldview. I think the classic example in the Old Testament is when Saul visits the medium at Endor and asks her to he says he wants to talk to Samuel, so he asks her to bring Samuel up. Now, whether she normally had the ability or not, commentators love to discuss this. That really isn't the question, because the narrative tells us that Samuel shows up. And Samuel is called an Elohim, which is a generic term in Hebrew for a resident of the non-human world. I call it a place of residence term. He's there, and it's him because he knows things that only Samuel said elsewhere in the Old Testament, and he knows what God's up to with the house of Eli and the house of Saul and all this kind of stuff. So it's him. So there's an indication that this kind of intersection can happen, and I would say, look, it's up to God. If God is really in control, it's up to God to allow this point of communication, this event, this communicative event to occur. And if he allowed it in this sense, in this scene right here, it's completely possible that God could allow it to have happened, to you at Grandma's funeral. I mean, you want to at least consider that a possibility. In the New Testament, an example would be when Jesus is walking toward the boat on the water. The disciples immediately say, "This is a ghost. It's a phantasm," is the Greek word. So that tells you, just that little sort of exclamation tells you that it was not a foreign idea in their minds that a spiritual being could take the form of a person and and show up like this, or that you could actually have the departed person. Maybe they thought something happened to Jesus. When Peter is thrown into jail in the book of Acts, and he's supernaturally released, by the intervention of an angel, and he goes to the door, the house where people are praying for him. He knocks on the door, and a little girl comes to the door, and she's like freaked out. She can't believe it's him. She goes and tells the people in the house, "Hey, Peter's at the door." Almost, forgetting in her, just being overwhelmed, she forgets to even let him in. "Hey, Peter's at the door," and they think she's crazy. And one of them says it must be his angel. Angel means messenger. So there was an idea in the ancient world, and certainly it's a part of the disciples' worldview, that if a person died, or even in life, they sort of had a spiritual counterpart that either came in your place after your death, sort of was you but wasn't you. That kind of odd admixture that you get. Or that was sort of a partner you. We in the paranormal world, there are experiences like that too. But again, these are just little glimpses that the disciples don't stop the girl and give her a theology lesson about how Peter's probably dead, or he's in jail, and what you're seeing is a demon, or you're nuts. Maybe you should go over and take some medicine. Or they don't react that way. And so I think at the very least, we need to have this as an open category. And I think we actually get into more issues, at least for the Christian, when it gets to the point of messaging, when an entity or some sort of experience comes with a message, either verbally or mentally conveyed. And I tell people that, look, this is not our turf. This is not the normal human experience. This is not the normal human realm. And so whatever this event or this episode, this experience told you, you need to measure that against what is revealed in the Bible, because if this is truly something that God is allowing to happen in your life, maybe to comfort you or to bless you or direct you in some way, the message will be consistent. It won't be contradictory and confusing to you.
See, this is the tricky part of this territory because I'm with you as far as a historical launching point, a text that's highly revered and very carefully studied being a grounding for our supernatural origins. I'm just not quite sure I can make the connection as a modern who's trying to figure out these questions to the last part of it, which is now I have to bring it into the present day, but my point of reference has to still be this old book. I mean,
Right.
is the Bible special? I guess that's a simple way of putting the big question. One of the guests we had on Skeptical a while back, a guy I really appreciate, is a Buddhist scholar and consciousness researcher, Dr. Alan Wallace, has spent 15 years in Tibet, fluent in all the languages, has been one of the main translators of some very important Buddhist texts. Hey, does he have a better understanding of God and in death, the Tibetan Book of the Dead? Is that a better place for me to go to understand, to have a glimpse, a launching point of what's going on? Or is the Bible better? Which is better? Which is special? Which is sacred?
Yeah, I think that question, in one sense, it doesn't matter, and in another sense, it does. It does matter in terms of messaging, because then you're getting into the content of a message, and then you can evaluate the content of that message, in a number of ways, and then that takes you into the whole religious realm. Then you're quote unquote doing theology. But apart from messaging, if we believe that, as the Bible and certainly I'm almost willing to say every other system of religion or every other sacred text is going to sort of affirm this very basic idea that humanity lives in one realm and then there's this other realm over here.
Right.
If you're going to affirm that with the Bible and in concert with a whole lot of other stuff, then the question really doesn't matter, because one book isn't going to say A and the other book's going to say B, in terms of the experience or the possibility of the validity of the experience. Even something like your Buddhist texts and other texts, they're not going to assume that all such experiences are good. Even, I mean, there can be good and evil. You can be deceived. You can be affirmed. I mean, there's this sense of uncertainty about the experience, and especially when it comes to what the experience prompts a person to think or do. Even they all have some sort of need to evaluate something in the experience. But if you're just talking about the experience themselves, I don't think the question is the issue. But when it comes to messaging, sure, it certainly would be. And you have for the Christian, if I'm talking to a Christian about this, then they want to process that experience according to their theology, and we'll just put it that way, according to what they believe, their doctrine. And so there are ways to do that. And I think that's equally true with somebody else in another religious camp. They're not going to be very open to the experience if they have an experience that is utterly contrary, to, again, what they think. So they're going to have, some sort of need to process the experience in some way that's sort of consistent with where they are at that point, up to that moment.
Well, there's kind of a strange thing happening there, because really, I think the most current cutting-edge consciousness research would lean towards a more expansive worldview that should be in sync, certainly with Christianity, with the Abrahamic traditions, with, as you said, just about every wisdom tradition we can ever think of. And I think that's part of the reason why there's such an organized and systematic, institutionalized resistance to anything that kind of steps on those toes. But the contradiction then comes into there's also this other kind of pushback, particularly from conservative Christians, when some of that research, which would get us a little bit closer to that commonality, that big tent understanding of God, when it does step on somebody's toes. Another guest we've had on that I really appreciated is Dr. Larry Dawsey, who is was a physician for a long time in Dallas, and got into prayer research. And there's really some unbelievably impressive data that, of course, gets drowned out by a lot of atheist, skeptic types.
Sure.
That shows that prayer is efficacious, prayer works, and at the same time, the rub for Christians is the best evidence suggests that Christian prayer is no more efficacious than, Buddhist prayer or a Muslim prayer or anything like that. So again, how do we work out that big tent God spiritualism and the conflict it's sure to generate when my particular belief system, my religion gets left on the outside?
Well, I think that, quickly in regard to the atheism thing, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised at that because they're fighting for their faith as well.
Exactly.
They're not going to put it in those terms, but that's precisely what they're doing.
Exactly. I mean, just if I can interject, I heard this wonderful quote from really the guy who started the whole near-death experience research, Dr. Raymond Moody, and he has battled that crowd for a long time, and he said, we all have a relationship with God. And he said, those atheists, they have quite an intense relationship with God. And boy, if that didn't ring true for me, I mean, those are the people, they really have an intense relationship with God, and they're not about to change that.
No, you can see, why it would be pretty threatening to them. But, to me, a lot of the resistance, again, toward, sitting down at this particular table, it's really kind of counterproductive and I think sort of odd because let's just take evangelism, as a big umbrella topic here. Many people who this is their field or concern or what they do, whether they be pastors or evangelists or whatever, will say things like, hey, you need to sort of build common bridges with people to be able to talk to them. Well, no kidding. I mean, what bigger and better common bridge would there be to we both agree that there's some reality beyond the one we experience with our senses. And if we were sitting sort of in an evangelism class in church and you said that, everybody would be nodding their heads and, yeah, that's great. But then when you'd give this as an example, the reflex among many would be like, oh, I don't want to go there. And my question is why? Why don't you want to go there? Because that's really at a very basic level where everybody's at. So this is sort of a bridge moment or a bridge, opportunity to have the discussion that if you're concerned about converting someone, let's use that word. If you're concerned about that, this will help you talk to that person about other things eventually. And if you never get there, you're still on friendly terms. And there's a lot, to build a relationship on, a positive relationship on, with that person, to love them in the name of Christ, and just do what you can for them.
Mike, I'm with you, and we're so in sync that I hate to kind of break ranks here, but I have to push this a little bit further. What do we do when the research, the best that we can put it together, conflicts with doctrine? Another former guest.
Can you give me an example?
I will. Another former guest, Gary Habermas, who is, I guess, a colleague at you since you teach at Liberty University, and he's at Liberty University.
I've met him at conferences, but he's in the physical campus, and I'm in distance ed.
Great guy, really, I really appreciated talking to him. And he wrote a book on near-death experience and was right there with you and me and saying, look, no way can we hold to materialism and look at this data. This data just overthrows it. Get over it. We have to deal with it, But there is a real resistance to go further and really look at the implications for how we might test some Christian theology. And here, you asked for the example. Here it goes. Wouldn't we expect, we could make a hypothesis that Christians are more likely to encounter the all-loving God in heaven, or Christians only are supposed to, or we could make any number of hypotheses, and they would all, if you're familiar with the data, would all fall short. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any of those limitations associated with any religious belief whatsoever, or lack of religious belief, that correlates with this encounter with what we would all admit sounds like God, sounds like heaven, all loving, all completely knowing, that whole thing. So what do we do with that? What do we do with our assumptions not being met, our tests not being met? And the big tent is still there, but can we let go of some of the doctrine?
Well, I think, to be really honest with you, I think to actually come up with an answer that might be sort of approximating a correct answer, I think we'd have to know more information because, I don't know how we'd get more, which is the sort of depressing part, but I think we'd have to know more information in that. Let's say we have, some, let me put it this way. It would be very easy if someone was sort of theologically bent out of shape over this, and I'm not going to say that Gary is, but just anybody. It'd be very easily, let's say, for Joe Christian Evangelist to hear that question and say something like this. Okay, we have a Buddhist over here, or pick your religion or non-religion, that had this near-death experience, and they have this experience of being in the presence of God, and it's all positive, and it's good and loving, and so on and so forth. It'd be very easy for that Christian evangelist to say something like, well, we don't really know what that person's spiritual state was, because they could have believed at some time in their childhood, they actually could have accepted Christ, they could have done this, that, and the other thing, and that's why their experience works out that way. Now that's sort of cheating,
right,
as far as an answer, but the reality is we don't know, and so it's part cheating, but it's part also maybe unintentional honesty, that we don't really know why this person is having XYZ experience in terms of its details. Now, it's not always completely consistent, and we both know that as far as what a person experiences. It is overwhelmingly positive. And some of this sort of nonverbal messaging, I think, also is sort of equatable to things that go on in life. For instance, a Buddhist might have an encounter with a person who does X, Y, or Z, and it makes them think of some quality of their faith or some quality of a deity that is warm and loving and so on and so forth. And there may not be a one-to-one connection between those two things at all, but yet it's a response and it's a reaction. So you may have the same sort of thing going on within a person's internal nature based upon the experience, to that point. Who knows? Ultimately, I just don't think we can really know this. If I was a Catholic, I would say something like this. Well, it doesn't really matter ultimately, and if Catholics are disturbed by this, you need to read more Catholic theology.
Right. No, I think you're onto something here. Go ahead.
If I was a Catholic, I would say, look, it doesn't really matter what religion a person is, because anyone who dies and gets to the presence of God in a positive way gets there because of Christ. And a Catholic theologian is going to explain, sort of, he's going to lump all the religions sort of under the common grace of God, and the resurrection is due to what happened at Easter. And so no matter what faith you have in this life, if you respond the way God wants you to the truth that you had up to that point, and the reason you don't just, the reason you are resurrected, you have an afterlife, is Christ, again, in some supernatural way. That's why you're there, and that's why it feels good. There's all sorts of ways, Christian theology could accommodate this. If I was a universalist, this wouldn't even be a question, because everybody goes there anyway. And there are Christian universalists.
I sometimes wonder why people look for such a convoluted, and this is often atheists, such a convoluted explanation for things to avoid what seems obvious. Like in this case, what seems obvious is, hey, there is this other reality. There is consciousness outside of our brain. Sorry, that's the way it is. Now we have to figure out what that means. And then once we look at these accounts, we have to accept that there does seem to be this moral imperative, and we didn't want to go there, but yeah, there does seem to be this God, for lack of a better term. But once we get there, why not postulate that the big tent? Why can't God perfectly reflect Christianity to those who are so inclined, and at the same time perfectly reflect Buddhism, Hinduism, Sufism, every other religion for all these multiple paths to the same, if it is one umbrella? Why is that such a difficult concept?
Well, for the Christian, it's a difficult concept because of very specific. Catch the way I'm saying this. The very specific faith claims and faith assertions that focus on and center on the work and person of Jesus Christ. Now, again, going back to our previous illustrations, and this is a little flippant, a little whimsical, but I'll put it this way: if after I die and I'm in the presence of God, and God or Jesus walks up to me and says, you know, all that theological stuff that you guys were working on, it wasn't too bad, but there were things about it that really didn't need to be said the way they were said. Mm-hmm. And I just want you to know that there are people here who would not have fit into that theology, but they're here because of me, because of what I did on the cross, because God sent me into the world. Would you like to stay, or do you want to take a rain check? I'm staying. I mean, I'm not going to go away from that conversation feeling bad or disappointed. I'm going to go away just as grateful then as I would have been if he walked up to me and said, "Hey, man, you nailed everything." So I think in some respect, we have a certain commitment. The different stripes of Christianity have a lot invested in their particular articulation of points of Christian theology. And if it happens that the Universalist one was actually right at this point, but maybe wrong in something else, are we really going to care? And I would say, if we're all honest, when we're on the other side, we're not going to care. But people care now because we're not on the other side, and the perception is, and in some cases it is an accurate perception, that hey, these ideas here are mutually exclusive, and we can look at each other and say, yep, that idea that the Hare Krishna has, or the Buddhist or the Muslim has, is diametrically opposed to this one over here. That may be completely true, and you may be defending the correct one, but if in God's plan of salvation, this point of Catholic theology is right, that, hey, look, God judged the human heart on the basis of what they understood about what Jesus did, and their faith response in God's mind was a good one, was a positive one, was a right one, even though they were messed up theologically in other areas. But they're with the Lord. Does that upset you? I mean, if you answer yes, that you're upset, again, this is all hypothetical, it's all speculative, but if you were to answer, yeah, I'm ticked, because this person's with the Lord with me, you have a bigger problem than this question.
Right, you're right.
Your spiritual problems are a lot bigger than this one. So on the one hand, I think there are reasons, to sort of agree, or be in one tradition and not be in other ones. I mean, there are, real theological points that they don't all agree. There are diametric oppositions. A can't be, B, and B can't be A, and all that sort of stuff. But the ultimate issue is, we assume that these parsings that we do here on earth in this life are the correct ones, when in God's mind, he might, dare I say, have a little more, tolerance, to making theological errors, and just judging a person's heart response to some key point of the faith, in other words, you may not understand Christ, you may not, quote unquote, accept Christ precisely the way the New Testament would like you to, but you're not rejecting him either. There's all these sort of fuzzy areas. I'll give you one that's in Scripture, in the Old New Testament, and that is, what about Old Testament people who lived and died before there ever was an incarnation, and Jesus goes to the cross and all that stuff? It's very common for evangelical, we'll use them for an example, evangelical theologians to say, look, God accepted them on the basis of their response to the revelation they had up to that point. And that's up to God. We leave it with God. It's his business. That's not in my job description. It's in God's job description. And we leave it there. Well, that might work more widely than we know or than we realize. And I hope we wouldn't be upset if that's the case. I don't know that it is. I mean, for me, in this life, I take theological positions because I think, I've come to to at least my satisfaction, a coherent understanding of whatever passage or whatever text, whatever issue it is, and some things I'm perfectly inclined to say, hey, I don't know, it could be two or three things, and I can rank them in according to some hierarchy of likelihood, but. There are a lot of people that just want, look, I don't want a hierarchy of likelihood. I want to know what I should think, and I want to know it now. And when what I think, I better be able to find on that page, in this paragraph, in this verse. And if I can't, then it can't be real. Their mind just works sort of in the opposite trajectory. And, I think that we need to be a little more humble than that. We need to sort of have a lower view of our own omniscience with some of these things, and yes, stand where you're going to stand, theologically, and fight the good fight, and so on and so forth. But if you're wrong, and sort of some of these experiences are some indication that God's level of tolerance might actually be wider than yours. If that turns out to be the case, you have no right to be angry with God. The thing made has no right to say to the maker, "What the heck are you doing?" It just then you're out of line. Mm-hmm. Then your theology becomes more important than the object of your theology, the thing you claim to be following and worshiping. So I think we need to do our best, but we need to again have a low view of our own omniscience when it comes to this stuff.
Great. Hey, Mike, tell people where they can find out more about your work and also what you're up to these days and what we might look for from you in the near future.
Well, my homepage is drmsh.com. So it's short for doctor and then Michael S. Heiser. So drmsh.com. And that is sort of the gateway to a bunch of other websites I have and some blogs. I try to maintain 3 blogs divided up by interest areas. So that's sort of where to find everything. I started a podcast on my biblical studies blog, The Naked Bible. So that's found at nakedbiblepodcast.com. I'm only 3 episodes in, but it's a lot of fun. It's more work than I thought it would be, but it's a lot of fun. And I'm also offering some language courses and some theology courses online as well. The Institute, the name of it is Memra, and all of this is accessible on the front page of my homepage. So that's the easy one to remember, drmsh.com.
Great. Well, it's been great having you on. Interesting discussion, and thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And you continue what you're doing. It's a fascinating area, and I don't know what show would cover it more widely than yours. So I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing.
Well, thanks. I have to throw that net all the way out there to the reaches and see what we pull in. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.